My name is Jan from Age Friendly Vibes, and I also have Sarah, who's going to be co-presenting with me from Changing the Narrative, and Chris is going to be monitoring the chat. So thank you so much for coming to our talk about jokes about getting old. And I wanted to start out by just acknowledging that who doesn't love a good laugh? Because for many people, it's a way to relieve tension, to escape reality, and to find common ground. However, when it comes to jokes about getting old, it's no laughing matter. What we joke about reflects our biases against aging. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to explore how humor can disguise ageism, which impacts our ability to stay employed, the quality of our healthcare, and even how long we live. You're going to learn how ageist humor can reinforce prejudices against older people in our society and is harmful. And we're going to share examples of ageist humor, including birthday cards. And after some discussion, we're going to see if we're all still laughing. And most importantly, when you encounter ageist humor, we're going to show you how to use it as an opportunity to talk about ageism. So I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jan, and I am the founder of Age Friendly Vibes. I'm a pro-age advocate and a creative entrepreneur. And I started this business during COVID after being inspired by an anti-ageist greeting card contest from Changing the Narrative. I've been involved with Changing the Narrative for several years. I was one of the original change agents, and I still am. So I was definitely aware of ageism, but I wasn't quite aware of how many ageist birthday cards were out there. And I decided to do something about it. As Janine would say, I decided to be about it, actually take action on it. And the result is a brand that I'm really proud of. I've gotten a lot of recognition in the greeting card industry with my line of clever, inspiring, age-positive designs. And I want to hand it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Brindle. I am the co-director of Changing the Narrative. We're a campaign of Next 50 initiative. And our goal, our mission, is to change the way people think, talk, and act about aging with the idea of ending ageism. And as Jan mentioned, Chris Gierkin, also co-directors on this call as well, and she's going to be helping with the chat. Just want to let you know, this is kind of a passion project for Jan and I. We both have been really caught with this idea of ageism and humor. We do a lot of work with messaging and how to talk about ageism, and there's something about humor that really it adds a whole extra level to it where it sticks. So we're excited about doing this today. It is also the first time we've spoken about it. So we'll be asking you to respond in the chat, trying to get your reactions and have you contribute a little bit to the process as well. All right. So just to level set, I'm going to talk a little bit about ageism, and that we give whole gigantic presentations on these topics. But I know a lot of folks on this call probably know a bit about ageism, but I want to get us all on the same page before we start out, or as we start out. So the official definition of ageism, and this is what the World Health Organization and lots of other people use, is prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination about a person based on their age. Another way to think about this is how we feel about them, how we think about them, and how we act towards people based on their age. Another a way I've talked about it, I think that's even simpler, is to think about, or am I making assumptions about someone because of their age? Because I know you're 30 or you're 50 or you're 70, do I assume that tells me what I need to know about you? I think most of us realize if we give it any thought that it's a lot more complicated than that one person at 50 and their life experience, who they are, all their identities, all the things that have happened to them, and all the things they might be doing can be quite varied. So ageism shows up in a few different ways. Again, this is just a really quick overview, but I want to get people thinking about all the different ways that it impacts us. One is it can be internal. These are the stories I tell myself. So this is the stuff I say in my head about, oh, I can't learn a new thing. I'm too old for that. Interpersonal is that same thing between me and another person. So I'm saying she's too old for that, or he's too old for that, or he shouldn't be here because he's too old to have this job or too young to have this job. The next one is institutional. This is when these beliefs about age and people of other ages show up in our policies. The thing that I refer to, I think, on this slide is the fact that medical studies sometimes aren't even including people over a certain age, as if the drugs we take or the things like that are just not even relevant if you're over 60 or 65. And then there are really large cultural narratives that show up in our movies and our advertising, assumptions about people aged. The thing here on the cultural side, example I give is, I'm sure many of us have noticed that sometimes an actress of a certain age may be cast as much older than an actor who's the same age as her. And that has to do with our ideas about women hitting a certain age and just no longer being valuable anymore. So we all have bias. One of the things we also always like to point out, and this is kind of, we talk about it sometimes as the no shame rule. When we think about age and we think about how we age ourselves and other people of age, most of us have done this. Have you said or thought you look good for your age? I absolutely have. Have you lied about your age, or even just not told anybody about your age? I certainly have skipped that because there have been times when being too old or too young maybe means I wouldn't get the attention I needed, or I wouldn't have gotten the job that I wanted. Have I ever thought I'm too old for that? I can't learn a new thing. I shouldn't try that. I've hit a certain age. I shouldn't wear these clothes anymore. We all have this bias inside ourselves and against other people. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have this kind of bias. It happens to all of us. And that this process of asking these questions is actually a way of all of us trying to do better. So we'd like to know, just to hear from the audience, what kinds of age bias have you experienced? If someone can give us some examples here and there of, besides the ones I've just given, of things where you've experienced either your own age bias or things that have been you've experienced inside or from other people.
And Sarah, I have one while we're waiting for people to respond in the chat. I'm married later in life recently, like in the past 10 years. And when I met my husband, when he would enter a room or when we would go to a concert or event, he would be sizing up the room to see whether he was the oldest person in the room. Now, like he's about 7 years older than me. And so I've never had that kind of a filter, but is just the type of person who's been aware of being the older person in the room most of the time. So I thought that was a really good way, a really good unconscious bias that you can have, because why would age matter when you're going to a concert and just being a participant? So that's one I've heard of or witnessed myself. So
I get that. Chris, what else do you see in the chat?
We have from Rose that I am too young to talk about ageism. She's heard that. So that's an interesting one. Yeah. And yeah, that you have to be older in order to address this is not accurate, actually. And we know younger people experience ageism. So that I should no longer expect career development because I am no longer talented. And this was when I was 43. That came from Sandra. Wow, 43. Yeah. Oh, yeah, workplace. And then Sandy said, my job got marginalized when new, younger management came in and got rid of the founders of the company. Oof. And then Sandra, and then people were being asked, when do you retire? Like that, that assumption that people are supposed to retire. Erin shared generalizations about generations, such as boomers and millennials, and just lumping people together into those categories with names like that, which is the whole us versus them. Being called sweetie by a young person at a store. And she has quotes around sweetie, quotes around young person. Melissa shared that I'm a reframing aging facilitator, and people say I'm too young. Older people should spread, and the older people should spread the word. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's some great stuff in there. I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, but the notion that ageism only affects older people, or that it's all, or that you can only speak about it if you're older. I think I hadn't thought about that as much, but that's definitely true. All right, let's go to the next slide. Those are some great. I appreciate that. So why do we care about ageism? I think from the things we just heard in the chat, people losing their jobs, people being pushed out of their jobs, people being called sweetie. I think I saw that one in there. Everyone loves that. Why do we care about ageism? Obviously, most of us think it's unfair. I mean, from those kinds of answers, we realize that it's unfair, it's unrealistic. Ageism also has some impacts that you might not be aware of. So we're going to start with health. This is a book that hopefully lots of people are aware of, but if you're not, you should be. It's called Breaking the Age Code. Dr. Becca Levy at the Yale Public School of Health published a whole body of research that she and her colleagues have done there, showing the impact of age-positive versus age-negative beliefs on our well-being. And the number that jumps out, because it's fun and it's a number and it sticks in your head, is 7.5 years. That people with age-positive beliefs tend to live, on average, 7.5 years longer than age-negative beliefs. So this ageism is not just unfair, unrealistic. It's affecting how long we live. It's also affecting our health. They've shown that better health results, better health outcomes come from having age-positive versus age-negative beliefs. Again, one that I think is really, that sticks with people because there's such a fear and a stigma around memory loss and dementia in our society, is that age-positive beliefs actually lead to a reduced likelihood of dementia, even in people with genetic markers for dementia. And I think more recently, I don't remember if this one's in the book or not, they've shown that age-positive beliefs actually can improve our memory and reverse mild cognitive decline. There's lots of meaty stuff in here. There are lots of studies about this, but ageism is also literally impacting how well and how long we live. And then next, ageism also costs money. Obviously, if it's affecting our healthcare, it's actually affecting the cost of our healthcare. And it was more work by Dr. Levy and her colleagues that showed that they estimate about $63 billion in annual healthcare costs based on ageism in healthcare. And a lot of the things we just heard in the chat where people were giving those contributions about how they've experienced ageism, it's age discrimination in the workplace. AARP in 2018 estimated that workplace age discrimination is costing the economy in the US $850 billion. That was 2018. We all know a few things have happened since then, a pandemic, some other things, where older adults are being pushed out of the workplace and having an even harder time getting back. So it's no doubt getting even worse. I don't have this on the slide, but another thing I wanted to mention that really struck me about a year ago, I think it was early this year, last year, a study came out of hiring managers asking if, and one of the questions on there was asking if they had age bias or how they used screened for age on resumes. I think it was 38% of them said they consciously knew they were aware of screening for age when they looked at resumes. So if that's how many are consciously doing it, I imagine there are a few more that are probably actually also screening for age. It's even bigger. And then I think this last bullet point is one that most of us are really familiar with, the anti-aging industry. Wrinkle creams, retinol, Botox, all the things we're doing to try not to look older. In 2021, that industry was estimated to be worth $60 billion, and it's expected to double by 2030. And that's the way things are going. It's also costing us a lot of money in all this effort we make to try to look younger. That was a lot of information. There's a lot more on that kind of stuff. But the point is that ageism matters. It impacts us how we feel. It impacts how we live. It costs us money. Good news. If there's just from, as we talked about with that research earlier, those messages matter. Just like age positive beliefs or age negative beliefs can hurt us, age positive beliefs can help us. There are ways to counteract ageism. Research shows that the language we use, the stories we tell, even the images we see, which is why I've put a few images on this slide, impact what we believe and how we act when it comes to aging. And this has been something we found that's really effective, an effective way to get this, to talk about aging and how to deal with ageism when we're changing the narrative. But one of the sticky points has been humor. People who are like, yep, ageism's real, shouldn't make fun of old people. Maybe I shouldn't say bad things about them. But sometimes when there's a joke, they're like, but that one's funny. I think humor, maybe I'm okay with humor that mocks people. I just won't maybe age discriminate during work. So we really wanted to get to this idea of humor and how humor interacts with our ideas about aging. And I'll hand it over to Jan.
Okay, so my first question to you all is if you believe that laughter is the best medicine, right? You've heard of that phrase before. And I wanted to basically start out by saying that definitely there's a lot of upsides of humor. Humor is used to relieve tension. It makes us not feel like we're alone. It helps us to find common ground. But that doesn't mean that all humor is good. It's also used to mask our fears, and it's a reflection of what's going on in the world and it helps us make sense of the world. It relies on stereotypes, and it's also often used to mask, used to mask hatred and bigotry. And I wanted to talk also about the way humor can be used to mask our fears and showing up in the form of self-deprecating humor, which can really have a huge impact on people. Your self-esteem can be impacted. You begin to feel less optimistic. And it's also been linked to serious conditions like depression and anxiety. And when humor is used to punch up or punch down, that means when you're at a higher status than someone else and you're making fun of somebody from a lower status, it's used to define your in and out groups, and it's a big source for othering and division in this world. So there's a lot of dangers with humor as well. I wanted to go through some examples of ageist humor. Now, I'm not an expert in humor, but I do come from a long line of clever and witty people, and I do love comedy. So comedians view age as a safe topic. We've really progressed away, from my perspective, from what was once very acceptable and from a racist and a sexist humor standpoint. But we still feel like the topic of growing older is fair game. One of the things that comes to mind is John Mulvaney, who is one of the cast members for Saturday Night Live and a stand-up comic. And he has used age specifically. He typically steers clear of the other topics, but has definitely taken aim at age in his skits. So stand-up comedians or comedians definitely are using age as a relatable subject matter. And the other one is Sarah mentioned a little bit about what we see in the media, what we see on TV. So one of the things that when I think about ageist humor in particular, when it comes to television, I think of Golden Girls. And now I love the Golden Girls. They're definitely making a resurgence. They're a beloved comedy, and they had many progressive aspects in the show. However, if you look at the characters, they used a lot of self-deprecating humor and a lot of kind of not so positive aspects of themselves from an age perspective. So I feel like there was some ageist humor being used in the Golden Girls at the expense of trying to get a laugh. And finally, I wanted to talk about Maxine. How many of you remember Maxine? So she was that first edgy, snarky character that Hallmark created as part of their shoebox greetings line. It happened back in 1986. Well, she paved the way for the birthday card with the cartoon-like visuals, and then you've seen them with the sagging body parts, with the clever sentiments about how awful it is to be old. And even though the illustrator that created Maxine retired long ago, you can still find Maxine cards and the cards that were inspired by Maxine on the shelves of greeting card stores today. So there's no doubt when it comes to celebrating birthdays that age is truly the elephant in the room. In our youth-obsessed culture, anything goes when it comes to making fun of getting older. In this section here, Sarah and I are going to go through some examples of cards that you're going to find at a stationery store, at a pharmacy, some of the big box retailers. These are some of the cards that have stood out to us as far as being ageist. So I mentioned that I'm a greeting card designer involved in the Greeting Card Association. These two cards stand out to me because one of my pet peeves is that the declaration that you are now old. So all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're old, and it usually coincides with your birthday, and your loved ones want to tell you about this. So this card on the left is one of the most popular greeting cards from a small maker that I know. It represents like 90% of the sales of her line, and she's very successful. It says, "I'm sorry I called you old. I thought you knew." And the one on the right there's a lot of variations of this, but this particular one, asks or suggests that if you want to find out if you're old, just fall down. If people laugh, you're young. If people panic, you're old. So that's kind of representing that binary and that young old divide. Now, this card was from another maker that is on the shelves of Barnes & Noble right next to one of my pro-age cards, but this one was, interestingly enough, a very recent award winner. So these are cards that are on the shelves in retailers today and are very popular. And Sarah was going to talk about these particular cards.
Yeah, I wanted to insert a few examples. Like, part of the thing is not even just whether a card's funny, but whether it's reinforcing a stereotype, and whether it's kind of just laying down more tracks on that narrative that there's something wrong with the age you are. And this also happens to people no matter your age. Apparently getting old happens at 30 or it happens at 20. I don't know what young is. Maybe young's maybe 18 to 21, and after that, you're old, and before that you're too young. It certainly happens to people when they're scared of teenagers. I have teenagers. I relate to this on some level, but the notion that all teenagers are scary and that we need a warning, you could certainly consider that a stereotype and consider that a bit over the top.
So we wanted to ask you in the chat, maybe you can take a moment here to just let us know, we want to know, how would you feel if you received one of these cards? The type of cards that have this young old divide. You're either young or old, or as Sarah was mentioning, it's bad to be young, it's bad to be old. How do you feel about this?
I have to say, when we were looking at these cards, one of the things we couldn't find was a good age. And I find that really interesting that there was an article recently, a lot of people have written about it, Jean's written about it, the idea that there's no good age to be female. I think there's no good age in a lot of ways. Like, whether you're always too young, you're always too old for something, we seem to find a reason to use age to put it down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sounds like
getting some. Oh.
Yeah, what's it say in the chat there, Chris?
Yeah, Wendy said she would hate it to get a card like any of these. Dave said, "I'd question my relationship with the sender."
Ouch,
Sharon was saying that she used to think these were so funny and used to send them myself, but no longer. I think they just continue to create the ugly narrative. True. So that's good. Teresa said, it seems like ageism happens at any age. That's true as well. Yeah. And Lynn shared Where is the celebration? Question mark, exclamation point.
Mm.
And Sandy said, if I received one of those cards, I would immediately reconsider my quote friendship with the sender, just like shared earlier. Margaret shared that I think one of the important points is that the problem is not just how people feel consciously. These kind of comments affect people on a subconscious level too. And yeah, that's really, really what it boils down to, right? That's the root of this. That's the hidden part of the damage that this all causes. And Christine shared that I'd feel labeled. We seem to feel some comfort in it. Truly, we got to get rid of labels. And Renee said, if the card reflects reality, yes, people do panic when you fall. If you're older, I would feel or refuel that it reflects current society. And Dave said it highlights centered attitude toward aging, probably their fear.
Yeah, I agree with Renee's comment about that notion of like, why is it funny that people are scared of me falling down? Like it's just lots of layers. So great comments in here. I wanted to do a couple other cards. These two are my pet peeves. They're two that I've found over in the past year or so. And I think they're both examples of how ageism is also layering on other biases and other fears, other things that we have. This first one, old person's birthday card, and it's a walker. I don't know how someone could feel good about that. So we're going to make fun of people for needing a walker. If you were 20 and you were in a car accident and you needed to use a walker, that's funny. Why is it funny when an old person does? This notion of how we make fun of people with disability, or we consider that something to mock, is bad. And then to layer that up with the ageism on top of that. This second card, and it's kind of hard to read it here. I apologize. It's just kind of a blurry copy, but it says, at our age, swimming is dangerous. Lifeguards don't try as hard. And it's three women, presumably at least middle-aged, in the water. And again, this is layering on things, again, with the idea that if you're attractive, your life isn't as valuable. And then we're also equating attractive with being young. These people aren't young. So then age equals unattractive equals your life isn't valuable. Lots of layers. Like these are just some of the most extreme examples. I think there are some cards that make jokes about humor where I'm like, I don't know, that's kind of on the border for me. These just struck me as really strong ones, but also pointing out that we're layering ageism on top of all kinds of other things like ableism and like lookism.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to kind of jump off from follow up with what Sarah is saying too, and the reinforcing of the stereotypes. And this particular one, I happen to have a tech background, and this one's making fun of forgetting passwords, which again, because it's relatable, it's something that draws people in and makes you chuckle, right? So this particular one, though, too, has got these two women that are portrayed as kind of the oldest of old from an older adult perspective. And also on the inside, it also, kind of mockingly asks you to enter your 2-digit age to enter. So this type of card is definitely ageist and mocks our tech ability and contributes to the tech divide that really impacts ageism in the workplace from my perspective. And this is one that I have a personal gripe with. So there's many layers in this one too. This is from Auntie Acid, I think is the name of the character. This is a Maxine spinoff that's definitely alive and well today. This card I found in a gift shop in a resort area in Colorado when I was shopping for a plant. I saw this card on the shelf last summer. So this is on the shelf right now. It was produced by a large greeting card firm. So it says, I thought I was having a hot flash this morning and I realized my left boob had fallen into my coffee. So many, aside from the caricature of the older woman, the fact that our body parts are sagging and that we're unaware. When I was in this gift shop, the friend that I was with was a breast cancer survivor, and she was just horrified by this type of a card. So anyway, this type of a card has multiple layers, as Sarah was mentioning, of things that just make it something that I don't understand why these types of cards are on the shelf. So our question for you now in the chat again, now, do you think that greeting cards and these types of cards have an impact on the perception of aging?
And so one of the reasons we asked that is I think we've gotten that response from people that like, I'm not okay with ageism, but the cards are funny. We don't think those are relevant. So we're curious if how this feels relevant to you.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is it's a personal exchange. And so I want to buy this card for my bestie, even though everybody's seeing them on the shelf. So go ahead, Chris. What are you finding in the chat there?
Yeah, Margaret shared that she says, I think if a similar joke was made about gender, race, religion, etc., it wouldn't get a laugh, right? So we have to think of the context and who's being harmed and age. We are all aging. We're all in that. And so we're all being harmed. Then Sandra shared, I think the main issue still is that many people don't reflect on their subconscious biases, such as age bias. So it's important that we have the conversation with our friends, family, and colleagues. Absolutely, yes. And to become more conscious, right? That's the work we all can do. And Teresa said, I think they add to insecurities and fear. And I think giving one is a power play at best and a dig at worst.
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely.
Yeah.
A good point.
There's a lot of really good feedback in the text here.
All right.
So
well,
we're going to get to those in a second too.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. So why birthday cards? As I mentioned, birthday cards have been a good access point to talking about ageism. It's the one time that we all talk about our age. It's the one time maybe we don't even think about it. Most of the time we get a birthday, we think about what's happening on that date, that we've gotten older. It's certainly a time, as you can tell from birthday cards, that we remind each other of our age, sometimes celebrate it, maybe not sometimes in great ways. Hence, at Changing the Narrative in 2020, we created an anti-ageist birthday card campaign. 2020 was the first round of it, and then we had a new round of cards that came out in 2023, where we asked for people to design cards that celebrated age or gave more positive messages. And here are a few examples. The first one is a woman with white hair, and it says, "Great stories take time." The second one is another play on that, that idea that some positive things come with aging. This says, "Look how the future is unfolding from seeds you planted along the way." And this last one is a bit of a play on the idea of "you look great for your age" or "you look good for your age." Instead, it just says, "You don't look a day over fantastically fabulous." So the idea is that we want to start getting people to think about the messages that we send in birthday cards, and maybe start tipping the balance towards there being more positive messages out there about aging.
And I love all of these examples, Sarah. I think these types of cards counter all of the negative cards that are out there around aging, and we need more and more of these, which is why part of my mission is to help in the greeting card industry, mentor my peers that are makers and help inspire them and educate them about ageism so that they create more age positive cards like this. I wanted to then take a minute to talk about some of the cards that are in my line in particular. Again, remember that I was heavily influenced by Changing the Narrative, and I'm first off a pro-age advocate and very active in the pro-age community. And secondarily, I have a graphic design background. And so I've used and I told you I was witty and funny, comes from my mom's side. But anyway, I've immersed myself in the greeting card industry, and I'm loving it, and have come up with some designs that are starting to get some recognition like these. So this first one on the left is "The older you get, the more beautiful you are inside and out." This card has been picked up by Barnes & Noble and Paper Source and is on the shelf in retailers all across the country. And I love this card. It's just such a beautiful sentiment that I can't imagine anybody not wanting to hear this kind of message on their birthday. And then some of my cards in my line, I have over 75 age positive greeting cards. The one in the middle is a great conversation starter, or just a little bit edgy, but it says, "You're at the age when you realize they were all wrong about this age." So that's a great card to give somebody when somebody that's acknowledging that, hey, we're, on the other side of we're sick of being, misrepresented as we get older. And then the last one on the right says, "The streak continues aging fiercely since birth." So that's another play on from an age positive standpoint. But some other cards that I really like are from other makers that I was mentioning, aside from in the Changing the Narrative greeting card contest. This one on the left from 27 Design, she's a friend of mine, and this card is also on the shelves of Barnes & Noble and Paper Source, and was impacted or influenced by the age positivity or the ageism education that I've been providing within the greeting card industry. So it says, "Age is beauty, happy birthday," which is, again, just another lovely, lovely sentiment. And the one in the middle, I was at a greeting card show in April, and this maker, Pier 6 Press, is just huge. They're very popular, very award-winning line. And she created this card that says, you're more vibrant with every year. Happy birthday. And she added this line to her card. I mean, this card to her line as a nod to the age positivity. And the same goes true for Red Barn Press. So Carol Ann has a line of illustrated cards and has also chosen to add some age positivity. So what I'd love for us to do, we're going to do this more in the call to action, but when you see makers that have age positive cards in their line, it's great to support them and encourage them and buy from them so that we get more and more of these flooded into the market. I wanted to take a minute also to mention Better Birthdays, which is an organization that, or a collaboration really, focused on birthdays, basically how to have an age positive, age friendly birthday. Sarah and I were both involved with the founding of this organization in conjunction with Janine from Changing the Narrative and Dave Martin, who is on from Canopy, and Hannah McDowell. And we've been meeting on a regular basis to pull together articles, events, and also this website has specific cards that are age positive that you can use as a resource, but it's a worldwide initiative kind of anchored in the UK and the US. So visit betterbirthdays.org for more information about that initiative.
So before we get too much further into the positive side, I want to respond to this notion of can't you take a joke? One of the things that's been really surprising, or was surprising to us at Changing the Narrative, is when we did this anti-ageist birthday card campaign, it was great that it got lots of traction. It's had some of the best response. It's probably the best public-facing campaign we've done. You know, the reporters calling, wanting to hear more about it, people getting excited about it, but it's also gotten the most blowback. Janine, I think the couple different times she was interviewed on like radio or on major newspapers, we found a lot of people saying, wow, I don't agree with this at all. So we get this, and the response all the time is, can't you take a joke? So I would like to try to respond to that a little bit and talk a little bit about some ideas of humor. So can't you take a joke? One question I have is, I almost think that's the wrong question. Instead of can't you take a joke, should I take a joke? If you tell me a joke, and you're laughing and I'm laughing, and we both laugh together, we've agreed on the stereotype or the storyline underneath. I think a lot of people in the chat have been talking about like our unconscious bias and our subconscious feelings about being awful and things like that. We all have to accept that storyline or the joke isn't funny. Someone pointed out, I think too, and a lot of people have pointed this out, that like there was a time when jokes about women were funny. When I was younger, I still remember people making jokes about women drivers, about dumb blondes. There are a lot of blondes in my family, and those were acceptable. It was okay to do that. I grew up in an area where people made fun of people based on their like European ethnicity. There were Italian jokes and there were Polish jokes and there were German jokes and things like that. That stuff has kind of gone away in my circles. And the same response was given back then. The idea of like, well, can't you take a joke? We all know that Italians are this, or we all know that people are like this. We have to accept that storyline underneath to even ask that question, can't you take a joke? So I would dig a little deeper and say, should you be taking a joke? Is that storyline that do we agree on that, and should we still be taking it? Because those things are really reinforcing stereotypes, and we have to accept this stereotype, believe in this stereotype for that to be funny. And when we do, that just normalizes prejudice. That repeating these stories over and over again, even in a joke, is making it more normal, and it's making that the common storyline that we hear all the time. The last little piece I want to bring up is the idea of context matters. And this one's really a big one. There are a lot of places to go with this. Where and how we tell a joke or use our humor also impacts things. Birthday cards, the example we've been using, are a public statement as well. So if the birthday cards are sitting in Target or Walgreens or in your greeting card store or in Barnes & Noble, as Jan just mentioned, that story is happening there. People are seeing that, whether they buy the card or receive the card or give the card. Even if I'm setting it on my shelf or it's on my desk at work, it's public. That information is there for everybody. So we're actually putting that in there as a public thing. And I also think the context matters, because you never know how these stories are influencing people. I remember, I think it was one of my first jobs out of college. It was a long time ago when I was in my 20s. And there was a card going around the office from my boss, who was, I thought, super old at the time. I think he was turning 48, about old dogs not being able to learn new tricks or being past his prime or something like that. And in our small office, we all signed the card. I did too. You know, he's old, that's funny. I remember him opening the card from everybody and having his cake at the office, and you could see his face fall. You could totally see his face. And it was the first time it had ever occurred to me that it wasn't funny to laugh at it. Kind of stuck with me. I didn't do anything with it. And now that I work on this campaign and thought about this, and I'm older too, I've thought about it. I'm like, our HR manager signed that card. So if our HR manager signed that card and believes that that's a funny story, that old dogs can't learn new tricks, or cards going around you hear about lazy millennials or entitled teenagers, if we're all signing those cards and we're handing those around, what's the chance that there's an unconscious bias in our hiring manager's head about who they're hiring? And now we've actually seen studies that support that. So I think when we send these cards out, even if it is kind of a joke just between me and you, it's still public, and there's a still context. There's still a big context to how those are going to be heard everywhere else. So can't you take a joke? I think it's a meaty thing. I'm actually beginning to read studies, and there are people studying the psychology of this. I want to know more about it, but I don't think it's as simple. And when you say, can't you take a joke, you're dismissing all these other things beneath it.
Oh, some great points there, Sarah.
Yeah. So I guess now that we're thinking about this, our point would be that ageist humor is still ageism. It's still a story making fun of people based on age. It's still based on exaggerations. It's still based on stereotypes. It's still reinforcing negative beliefs. And unfortunately, a lot of it's still prevalent. And a lot of it really flies underneath the radar, particularly with humor. There's something about humor that lets us just kind of say, okay, I'm allowed to say this thing. And it happens with racism. It happens with all kinds of things. And it certainly happens with ageism, that like, if I make a joke about it, if it's in the context of a joke, it's okay because it's just a joke. And as much as I love humor, I think it's life-saving. There's certainly been many times in my life where humor has been what's gotten me through something. That doesn't mean that all humor is good or necessary.
I'm going to transition now into what is not just the good news, but the best news is that we feel very confident. Again, I was mentioning I'm involved in the pro-age advocacy space. There's a lot of great things happening as far as ageism awareness, not only in changing the narrative, but a lot of great books that have been coming out, a lot of people speaking on it. There's just a lot of great education and awareness on ageism. And the second point on the great news is that your age beliefs are reversible. So as part of Dr. Becca Levy's research, the best news that she had within that longevity impact for people who have negative beliefs about aging is that you can reverse the impact of your ageist beliefs. So that internalized ageism, that self-talk that you have, when you flip that around, you can start reaping the benefits of having an age-positive mindset. So that's wonderful news. And the other good news is that there's many ways to get involved in the pro-age movement. So you can certainly engage like you're doing today here. Thanks for being here and caring about this topic and connecting with us. And I'm sure you're aware of the many events that Changing the Narrative hosts as far as providing education and awareness around ageism. Ageism Awareness Day is coming up on October 7th. That's sponsored by the American Society on Aging. And there's just countless other organizations, and especially in the senior living community, and the conferences and events that have ageism tracks and ageism awareness is just amazing and heartwarming. So there's many ways to join the pro-age movement. So I wanted to just, aside from letting you know all the things that are going on, I wanted to just take it back to you personally for a minute and just ask you as an individual, if you know someone who could benefit from age positivity, and maybe it's yourself, maybe it's a loved one, family, friend, can you let us know in the chat if you have people in your life that use self-deprecating humor, that use age as an excuse? How many of you have people in your lives that could benefit from some age positivity on a personal level?
Someone's shared President Biden.
Oh, that's a funny one. That was quick. That's very witty. I appreciate that.
We weren't going to go there, but thank you for
I wasn't going to go there, but that's funny.
Then someone shared their family, their whole family against one another in a loving way. Mm-hmm. They could, and we need to focus upon children, right? Stop the learning of ageism. Yeah, that's what came to my mind when you were sharing that, Jan, is children. Like if we can start educating from a young age, then it will have been built in over so many years, right? And Christine said, my beloved 97-year-old aunt. Margaret said, absolutely everyone. I have a father-in-law who keeps saying that he can't improve his health situation. And then she said, apparently the doctor tells him that. Yeah, that's really sad. You're right. Eileen said herself, Sandy, just about everyone I've met in age 50 plus job workshops, lots of internalized ageism disguised as humor.
Yeah.
Teresa said several of my friends and family in their 30s and 40s making jokes about getting old constantly. Kathy shared that as a physical therapist, I'm working on addressing this within my profession. Yay, Kathy. Many don't set expectations high enough because the patient is, quote, old, both clinicians and the patients themselves. I've heard that from my occupational therapist friend, Jillian. Yeah, that's a big problem. Okay. So that's all we have in the chat.
Chris's work too. Chris manages our Ageism healthcare campaign. So if you're interested in more of that, want to know more about that, we've got a lot on that as well. That's a side note, but that was lovely that Chris, that you were the one reading those.
Yeah. And from those examples, you can tell that a lot of the ageism shows up wrapped in humor, right? In the self-deprecating comments or in the joke, and it's just brushed off or passed off. So we're going to, this next step, talk about some of the things that you can do. And kind of going back to that elephant in the room on your birthday, it's a perfect time to talk about age on your birthday and how people feel about age. And so I think one of the best ways you can do it is to find one of those age positive cards and give that along with your gift. I know a lot of people, or some people in my circles anyway, are pushing back on greeting cards. They're getting expensive. They're getting, nobody reads them or whatever. If you can have a card that has meaning and has purpose and intention, it's priceless. You have an opportunity with it's an exchange from one person to another. There's not too many other times during the year that you have a chance to impact your loved ones and send them a positive message about aging. Let them know that, whatever personalized message you want to give them, whether it's that they're beautiful inside and out, that you're proud of them and all the things that they're accomplishing, that they're a great role model for aging, all of those things can be wrapped into a birthday card. And that goes in my second point, is to write that personal note inside. Don't be afraid of the blank card. A lot of the big brands, the Hallmark cards, they had the whole sentiment on the front, the whole sentiment on the inside. You signed it and you handed it over. So use birthdays as an opportunity to talk about age and talk about the positive aspects of getting older yourself. So if you're in a scenario celebrating a birthday with loved ones and friends and family, take a minute to talk about how you feel about getting older, especially if there's someone in the room that is, kind of bemoaning or complaining about age or complaining about their aches and pains, and just say, well, that's interesting because I don't really feel that way. I actually am pretty optimistic about getting older and feel pretty great about all the opportunity and all the positive upsides of getting older. So I think that's a great way that you can model positive aging and actually talk about it without actually being aggressive towards somebody. So someone was talking about a family member, maybe your aunt or somebody who is kind of grouchy or a curmudgeon about age. That's a great way to talk about, to actually get those influences to people. So the next part I wanted to talk about for a minute, just briefly, is that understanding more about the greeting card industry now, one of the biggest issues is where you're buying a card. If you go to the grocery store or a pharmacy, you're going to get those big brands with big volume. I call them the junk food of greeting cards. So it's like when you're rushing to the party, you're going to get that appetizer or that bottle of wine. Now in Colorado, we can do that, or a case of beer or whatever. And you go to the grocery store aisle and you grab the card, right? That is the impulse buy around cards, and that's where a lot of the ageist cards live. To get a little bit more variety, a little bit more intention around cards, you pretty much have to go to a stationery or a gift store. You're going to find that they support more cards that are curated from makers like myself. You'll find a lot of cards that support people of color and the LGBTQ issues going on. So I encourage people to go to stationery or gift stores to get cards that are curated from makers. You're going to get a lot more thoughtful sentiment in those types of cards in general. And the last place that some of you may be buying cards is online. And You can go to a marketplace like Etsy to look for birthday cards, or you can actually find them direct from makers from a Google search. But I don't know about you, but I was mentioning how I got into the anti-ageist greeting card business is because I Googled snarky or clever or funny birthday card, and I saw all the ageist cards that came up in the search results. So anyway, I just wanted to take a minute here to let you all know that to think about where you're buying your cards and actually to stock up on anti-ageist cards or age-positive cards so that when you have a birthday or an occasion, you have a stash to go to that is thoughtful and considerate and is going to take the most advantage of that birthday greeting. Okay, so as a consumer, we all know that we have the power in where we spend our money. One of the biggest pushbacks that retailers and makers have is that the ageist cards sell, right? And so I wanted to do a little bit of sidebar on that. So I believe that the ageist cards sell because they're on the shelf and they're front and center because the person who made it and the person who's a buyer for that store had some internalized ageism or some age bias. I'm not sure how much they're actually selling through, but they're definitely getting to the point where they're on the shelf and they're front and center. So the way to combat that is to not buy those ageist cards that we're talking about. And the second thing you can do is to give the store owner some feedback. So I was talking about that shop that I went to in the resort community that had the I knew I was having a hot flash wind, blah, blah, blah. I was trying to get in touch with the store owner and she wasn't in. And I felt bad for the clerk that was there, was just kind of holding this card going. And since then, I've thought of maybe taking that card and putting a sticky note on it and a note to the store manager, asking the clerk to give it to them and say, hey, are you aware that this type of card is damaging and it's harmful? I think that would be really powerful to get that store owner to get feedback. I know Dave Martin, one of our conversations from retailers' feedback in the UK about the popularity of ageist cards was basically the pushback was that nobody said anything to us about them. We haven't heard anything bad about these ageist cards that you're complaining about. So I think it's time that we all start trying to do what we can to give the store owner feedback. Or you could be like Jeanette. I don't know if Jeanette Liardi's on the call here. She had a blog post that she posted on her site. I don't know when it was, Jeanette, but it was about her receiving of an ageist birthday card and how she wrote to the company that made the card and explained why the card was offensive, and she actually got a response. So check out Jeanette Liardi's blog and look for that particular post on what she did to respond to the manufacturer, the maker of cards. So again, my peers in the industry all they're hearing is people want this type of card because it sells. That's the one that's getting selected. That's the one that's getting picked. So I'm going to keep making them because they're selling. And so it's up to us to stop buying and to call out these store owners and makers on ageist cards.
Yeah, Jan's touched on a lot of this, and we've talked a lot about using birthday cards as a form of activism, and it definitely that's definitely one way. But there are lots of ways to be pro-age and to do things. I know that when we talk to people at Changing the Narrative, we have a range of things that people are comfortable with. Some people are totally ready to take to the streets and carry signs. Other people are like, that's a lot. So there's a whole range of ways that you can make a difference. You can start by educating yourself at ageism, attending things like this, attending. There are lots of good books. There are lots of good seminars. There are resources, our website, other organizations. Just starting to educate yourself. Sharing and reposting age-positive content. We encourage people to be active on social media if you are already, actually, and to follow people who are saying good things and share those things. That changes algorithms, that changes search things, that changes how these things are showing up online. So we actually, we really much encourage people, if that's something you're comfortable with, to do that. And also just to talk about how you feel about getting older. It doesn't always have to be confrontational. Like I personally have never found it useful, and maybe I'm just not good at it, to walk up to somebody and say, shame on you, you said something I don't like. I don't think that's how we respond well. I don't respond that well when I'm told that. So being a positive example and saying, hey, this thing about aging is less fun, but this other thing is fun. And I am so excited about certain things. Like, I don't know anyone who wants to go back in time and be who they were when they were 20. Heaven help me. I'm really glad that I've learned all the things I have, and it's taken this long to get here. And I am looking forward to learning a lot more because I've got a long ways to go. So talking about those kinds of things and being positive about your age, I think, is another way you can be a pro-age advocate. You can do something about ageism. Whether you are someone who's comfortable writing a letter to the editor or to a greeting card company, go for it. But also just start doing the little things in your life as well.
I think that's pretty much it, but I am looking at the chat. It's been kind of buzzing through. So we have a few minutes here. Chris, I was wondering if you had any highlights that have come through in the chat that you want to maybe share that people have mentioned.
Yeah. So Margaret had shared that she says sometimes that she wants to use ageist cards as examples when she's speaking to groups, but A, she doesn't want to give the producers money for them, and B, she doesn't want to give that message any extra impressions. So that it's this tough line to walk. I'm curious, Jan, if you have thoughts on that too, right?
Yeah, that is a really great point. And I agree with you as far as like, we like to give examples of the ageist cards, but we like to focus more on the positivity and the positive cards and what you can do to support makers of positive cards. But maybe you can do like just an image of it in a presentation. If it's a presentation, you can take, I don't know what your feeling is on that, Sarah, or what changing the narrative stance is on that, but you could, I don't know, this is kind of a tough question. I'm a little bit.
No, I think in our work, we have pictures of them, right, Sarah? Like, I think we've gone and taken pictures.
But also I've made up my own. Like, I've gone and said, I am not a graphic designer, but I will play in Canva or someplace else, no matter your level of graphic design. I've even just made up my own, or I've taken the sentiments out of the cards and put them on the screen and said, here are 6 messages that we've heard in cards. What do you think of these? So sometimes there are more creative ways to talk about it without having to buy more. But it's always a little sensitive.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's true. And someone else mentioned they're hosting a book club in October, and they're going to discuss Becca Levy's book, which is great, Breaking the Age Code. And now they have more to add to their discussion, and they're going to talk about humorous birthday cards in their book club get together next month, which is great. And Bridget shared, my common refrain is isms are isms, whichever group we quote other, ageism is included. Short and sweet usually causes the reaction to be one of thoughtfulness rather than defensiveness. That's a good recommendation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, great. I'm looking forward to kind of reading through a lot of the great comments that were in the chat. I know we didn't get to a lot of them in this particular, as far as like talking about them or announcing them. One of the things I did want to mention, though, is that Sarah and I are really excited about this particular topic and hope to continue to deliver comments or discussion opportunities to discuss ageist humor, because I think there's a lot of things that you can dig in around this topic. So we'd really love to hear your feedback and get your kind of input on what you think about ageist humor and what we can do to make this particular message as effective as possible. So,
and we'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this call with some of the links and other information we've shared, and you can respond to that too if you have questions or comments on that as well, and Jan will be able to get those too. So we're happy to follow up afterwards. This is our first go at doing this, and it's a meaty topic, and we're interested to hear what people think.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. You can see where on the screen how you can stay connected with Changing the Narrative and with me in particular. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for attending. You got a gift of time of like 4 minutes. So we really appreciate you all being on and being interested in this topic.